So we had a lovely time shooting butterflies the other day.
Yes, great sport.
And
of minor variety.
the reason I like that story is it seemed to be characteristic of the kind of naturalist you are. Going back to the 1950s, you seem to have lived your life through two kinds of natural history, the David Attenborough kind and the Richard Dawkins kind. So the get out there and shoot the butterfly kind and the theoretical behavioural one. And you have also lived your life through a great schism in how we see human behaviour, this idea that people can become vegan and live a perfectly urban life and extend their virtue. And I'm going to ask you to put all this in context in a minute, but then this other kind, which perhaps we represent, which is the hunting, shooting, fishing version. Even as simple to say, is it Cavaliers versus Roundheads?
No, it's not Cavaliers versus Roundheads. It's realism, I suppose. I like to think of myself as a realist, and much of the beauty we see about us is due to the growth of and birth and little rabbits and so on in May and spring, and everything is wonderful and holy. But what they don't take into account is the culling in the autumn, when an ecosystem will support a certain number of people or animals or plants or whatever, and that is determined by the conditions in winter. So spring you get excess reproduction, diversity, and then in autumn you get culling, shutting down, and it's the culling and shutting down that is at the basis of what makes everything beautiful.
I got into terrible trouble with the butterflies piece because I called it shooting butterflies first of all, and lots of people, without even watching it, said, "Well, that's it. I'm unsubscribing. I've had enough," and then changed it to shooting cabbage whites, and we got a comment from Kim Hubbard, who writes, "Thank you for sharing the knowledge, Dad. Charlie, he's our dad now as well as yours. More of this, please." So
very flattering, very charming.
So it seems that the idea of what the film didn't change, but the idea about the film changed completely when you turned it from shooting butterflies to shooting cabbage whites. It was a perception problem, really, wasn't it?
Yes, indeed. People are profoundly ignorant and don't. I should not say people. Urban man is profoundly ignorant about the countryside, and that some butterflies are a perfect pest, and there is no distinction between butterflies and moths. Why is there a Royal Society for the Preservation of Clothes Moths? Or the cutworm, which eats your cabbages and so on, which is a moth, and so on, which is just parallel to, but it's, again, as you say, a matter of perception.
So butterflies are moths, but with better PR?
Well, cabbage whites are known to be, so you've got to tap into this pre-existing prejudice, which is founded on ignorance, and DNA, which elicits the feelings. But we'll come on to biophilia in a minute.
Oh, look out, everybody. So you see, it's all right for the listeners. I mean, they're just getting an hour of this. I've had this all my life, you know.
On and off, I hasten to say.
On
yes,
and off.
I mean, period.
All right. I'd like to take this back to the 1950s when you start, because it did seem to be a particularly interesting time in the discovery or the uncovering of these kinds of ideas. If you take my thesis that, if you accept my thesis that there was a David Attenborough strand, of which you certainly represented, and then a Richard Dawkins strand, which perhaps you adopted.
Yeah, well, it's not so much yes, Richard Dawkins will do, certainly. Yes, it was in the 1950s, and I grew up with fields of butterflies shimmering with blues and other species, and I would catch 4 or 5 in a net in one swipe. And that was in the 40s and 50s. Then I remember my father, we ran a tiny little chicken farm, and we had a house cow and called Mrs. Brown, and father used to dress her in white powder. He said, "This marvellous stuff, I can still feel the silky textures. It went through my hands in spoonfuls, and I smeared it on this cow, and it was more or less pure DDT. And it got rid of the flies, no end, but we were brought up on it. And then from then you got the development of insecticides and the crash of the wildlife. I mean, look around now, how many butterflies do we see? This time, 70 years ago, we'd have seen dozens in the garden on a warm day like this, and if we see one now, it'll be almost reportable in the local papers. and this is true of so much else.
So this is what's happened. I suppose the tragedy of human experience is there's no way you could have stopped it, is there?
No, because of this enormous DNA imperative, more. Not only more people, but more toys, more higher standard of living and so on. You think that in the 50s, very few people had central heating, or a refrigerator, or a car, or telephone, and all these have come since then. And as you expected, the definition of poverty is undreamed of luxury from the point of view of the 50s. And that has brought pressure upon the environment in a way that the world has never seen before, and multiplied by the sheer population.
Now, you went up to Oxford in the 1960s?
Yeah, 61, yeah.
1961. And I remember you saying you were quite surprised on looking at the results of the exams. This man that none of you had met, called Dawkins, was doing quite well.
Oh yes, Richard Dawkins. He was a colleague in that we knew each other, and not a friend. He had finished his degree and was doing postgraduate research, and I was just beginning mine. I was rather elderly. I didn't go up till I was 22, so I'm slightly older than him.
But he was sitting there with a slide rule and doing that kind of biology while you were counting snails on the North Cornwall coast.
Well, he was quite a good naturalist as well, and certainly I was more of a field naturalist. But we mustn't attribute too much to him. He stood on the shoulders of a man called Bill Hamilton, who was immensely important, and he said, "Now come on, let's just look at this. It's not the individual animal, but the gene. And we are merely marionettes dancing to the tune of our DNA."
And this is something which I'm not going to say you believe, but which you have seen to be demonstrated to be absolutely true.
Not absolutely, I never use the word, but it's the best explanation to date. And if somebody can find a better one, then come forward and publish it, and let's examine it. And certainly I can say in this context that Charles Darwin would have been delighted if he'd found somebody to prove him wrong.
Especially because he had trouble reconciling his views with his life as a good churchgoer, didn't he?
Well, he didn't. He soon gave up being a good churchgoer and gave it. And the thing that really horrified him was how could a beneficent creator have created a parasite that lives inside a caterpillar and saves the nervous system till last, so to keep the meat fresh.
That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Darwin's popularly praised seed as survival of the fittest, which you disagree with.
Yes. They say in the army, what's the first thing you've got to do when you join the army? To become a field marshal, as it was then, or command the army.
It doesn't have any anymore.
Yeah, and the first thing you've got to do is to survive. Unless you survive. So, in fact, life is about reproduction, replication, and so on. It's a continuous thing.
So not about survival.
Wait a minute. It's about reproduction, and the first criterion for reproduction is to survive. You can't reproduce if you don't survive, and so that's why we are so interested in the enormous funds put into the National Health Service. We want to survive.
So what would you replace the phrase "survival of the fittest"?
Reproductive advantage.
The reproductive advantage is, I must say, if I shoot a fox, it loses its reproductive advantage.
Precisely,
yes.
And yes, exactly. So survival is again necessary for that. Replication, reproductive advantage, mating opportunities, and if you want good field examples, go and visit Parliament.
Well, I think we will visit Parliament in this at some stage.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. You sent me some notes before we started today, and anybody who wants to talk about hunting and shooting and how we've got to where we are today, which is where I'd like to go with this today, will necessarily talk about Tony Blair and Tony Banks and Gerald Kaufman. But I would like you to explain it on a much wider scale. So Can we start with human beings a million years ago, or whatever we were a million years ago?
Well, the background to the hunting drive, if you can call it that, is that we had a disaster as a species 200,000 years ago when the human population was down to a few thousand. Various people have estimated 2,000 to 4,000 females. The males are cheap evolutionary material, so we don't count them. And this is around on the seashore of South Africa. Then we were obviously under enormous pressure, but we were surrounded by game animals, big mammals, walking meat stores. But being a grounded ape, toothless and clawless, there's nothing we could do about them. But we did have an enormous brain, for reasons I shan't explain now. And we used that to invent knapping a flint, hafting it, putting it on a wooden stick, and using it as an axe or a spear. And that immediately transferred us into a carnivore.
And can you not explain why we had an enormous brain? Because I thought we grew our brain as a result of our use of tools.
No, the tools came much later. We grew our brain so that we could know more people. And we developed in family units of 4 to 6 or whatever, and then rather more extended families of up to 10. And then the tribal unit was 150. And I'm a great follower of Robin Dunbar, who's professor of something at Oxford, and his theory of the evolution of language in a wonderful book called Grooming, Gossip and the Origin of Language. He's well, I shan't be distracted by that, but going back to the point, we grew an enormous brain so that we could know more people, their biographies, and the 150 people we know is called the Dunbar number. It's you can work out from the brain capacity of the other primates, orangutan, chimpanzees, gorillas and so on, what size family units they go around in by the size of their brains.
It's certainly interesting that on the internet we have shooting forums, people who talk about pigeon shooting or deer stalking. Yeah. I don't know if it's fair to say, but it seems to me fair to say that they tend to have 12 tribal elders, 150 core users, and up to 1,000 dinkers who pop in and have a look from time to time.
Oh yes, I've got a long list of the various units of human behaviour that fit into these categories. It's 4, 10, 150 is, you can't manage a company with more than about 100, 150, give or take 50%, without an administrative layer. The army, the company in the army is another example, and so on and so on. The Roman centurion, and so on. There are lots of these. It is a very viable unit. Then you go up to the 1,000, 2,000 people, which is roughly the number of people on a salesman's contact list, the number of people which a person can address by the unaided human voice, and so on. And then it goes up from there.
So things like microphones have started making a difference to the numbers.
Oh, but microphones and loudspeakers were an enormous boost, if not, well, I think certainly a significant factor in the rise of Hitler, who used them in the 1930s to good effect. He could address 10,000, 20,000 people.
Really for the first time?
Yes, for the first major political time.
And I suppose YouTube, we also have an advantage.
Oh, now there is no history about to show the impact of social media, where you can address millions, if not billions, of people at one time.
You can win the American presidency with a single Twitter account, I notice.
Yes, yes, there you are, if you want to.
If you want to, right. Let's say we're in. Yeah. I would like to remain in southern Africa, where we're surrounded by large, probably rather stupid animals in a way.
No, they had evolved with us, and they evolved very quickly, and so this is why there's still some big game in Africa. But in the rest of the world, we went through another, what's called a genetic bottleneck, when we got out of Africa, leaving the Africans behind, as it were. But they are genetically much more diverse because we were reduced again as we got out through the Sinai Peninsula, spread out over Europe and Asia, and in fact it's about 60,000 years ago. And we're very quickly in Australia and Tierra del Fuego, going down the continents. And that there we came across this megafauna in each of the great continents, and we simply walked up to them with an axe and hit them on the head until they were edible. They didn't recognize us as predators because we didn't have teeth and claws. And this upright walking figure of a primate was peculiar. So what I'm trying to get at is that the hunting ethic is deeply ingrained in the behavioural heritage of the human species, and probably also, though I don't know of it, genetically as well.
Can you characterise the argument as hunters versus farmers?
Not yet, no. This is pre-agriculture. But the point was that the animals had big stores of protein and fat, and we had enormous brains. And the growing child, the baby is born, and it takes 18 months to reach the stage of a chimpanzee newborn. And the brain has got to grow because walking upright is very bad for people giving birth with big heads. So they did need, and then all right, I'll come on to the women fancied men who could hunt because they provided meat.
So meat was really the key to our survival for how many?
I didn't think it was necessarily the key. There were certain populations that survived without it, but generally the ones that did best were those who used this enormous resource of fat and protein for their growing children. And look at the explosion we went. We occupied a vacant niche, which was a hunter by day. Most hunters, cats and dogs, wild cats and dogs, hunt by night, or crepuscular, when it's cool.
That's going to be a blow to our fox lamping listeners, I'm afraid.
But no, they're merely diverging and reducing competition. And the reason why foxes are nocturnal is because we are diurnal.
Right. So we tend to chase foxes in the daytime, and they've learned to go through bins at night.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So we've now reached a stage where 60,000 years ago we occupy almost every corner of the earth.
We began to, and we got down to the Americas only about 15 to 10,000 years ago, roughly, and New Zealand only 1,000 years ago.
And we had a profound effect on the fauna of New Zealand, didn't we? We killed all the big birds.
Yes, a quarter of known species of birds became extinct as we invaded the Pacific Islands. Most of them are flightless and endemic to the particular islands.
This is something which I find very annoying when I'm fighting the corner for hunting and shooting and broadcast interviews. There is always this perception that hunters hunt to extinction. But
no, this is the whole point. If I can leave a grasshopper ahead, and doubtless you're going to ask this, a hunter preserves an ecosystem in which there are always healthy individuals. If you try and save every life, you'll end up with a hospital full of decaying and aged and worn-out individuals, and the food supply will run short. But I'll come on in a moment to the display of caring. Anyhow, going back to that point, we extincted the moas and so on, and we also extincted this enormous 10-12-foot wingspan eagle that specialised in feeding on moas, and it used to fly in and settle on their heads, and the talons would go through and kill them, and then it would eat it. And unfortunately, it didn't distinguish between one biped and another, and the Maoris resented being attacked by this eagle, so they very quickly got rid of it, which is game conservation.
There are no eagles today that take children, are there? There probably are, aren't there?
No, I think they would perhaps attack and kill another mammal as big as a child, but usually this only happens once, and then the local population say, "Hey, that won't do," and go and deal with it.
There's been a trend on it on the internet to produce fake videos of eagles carrying off children, and they've been tremendously popular.
I dare say they have, but again, I think it's wishful thinking rather than as long as it's not your child. Yeah.
1,000 years ago, we occupy New Zealand. We've reached pretty well every corner of the earth. We have wiped out a reasonable amount of animals. I mean, it's not fair to say most of the South American megafauna, which were particularly stupid.
Yes.
I mean, they didn't have any predators apart from the saber-toothed tiger, did they?
They had the conventional predators armed with teeth and going around on all fours, and generally bipeds are pretty harmless until man turned up. And they didn't have time to adapt their behaviour even genetically. and they didn't have a good enough brain to adapt it behaviourally, whereas man has now changed to become a behavioural species, and we can change instantly. But what I'm interested in at the moment is this enormous infusion of caring throughout the world, and more important is to be seen to be caring. And if I can just digress for a second more, conservationists, gamekeepers, keep a population of healthy individuals of their target species and a supporting ecosystem. They've taken the point that life is a continuous process. You cannot save life. You can prolong it, but you cannot save it. And so this catchword has come to dominate the news items, saving lives, and they always adopt a particular tone of voice for saving lives, which you can't do. And that is quite distinct from caring for an individual.
Caring has evolved. We've known about caring for hundreds of thousands of years.
Oh yes, we human beings can attribute our success to caring for each other. And this is why the population has exploded. That's as my thing is, every 2 seconds 5 more babies are born than people die. That's the population of London every 5 weeks, which has to be accommodated.
Staying with, we'll come back to population because that is going to be the final knockout argument, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yes.
But staying with caring for the moment, and we are not the only species to care. All animals care.
Yes. We care. It's slightly more complicated than that because animals care for their young, obviously, because if they didn't, they wouldn't have it. The young wouldn't survive. But we are now in a position where we're display to each other, and it's no point in caring unless you're seen to be caring, and therefore no minister could or member of parliament could gain a seat on the ticket of we're going to abolish all hospitals and not care for each other. So it's being caring appeals to a motivation and a hormonal adjusted behaviour initiated by DNA. It's in our genes.
When you say caring, is that what I would call extending your virtue? So petting a baby rabbit, that kind of thing?
Yes. Again, it's not so much the good you're doing the baby rabbit or the good you're doing you, other than what other people see that you are doing.
Do you notice if you look at the great caring individuals of our time, people like Brian May from the pop group Queen or Chris Packham, the BBC presenter, there are many images of them surrounded by adoring females, and that would be why?
It increases mating opportunities. Yes, maybe not directly, but
well, probably is directly with the rock singer, isn't it?
Could well be. Yes. My knowledge of rock and pop singers is limited.
But I mean, one of the reasons you've only had 2 children, presumably, is you didn't pet enough rabbits and extend your virtue at people. I mean, not personally, but. You could say one could argue that.
Yes, there are other criteria come into play, of course, and it's a conscious decision to have as many children as we did, too.
Right,
which is good. Yeah. Now, I just want to make quite clear the difference between protecting individuals and saving every life and so on, and the display, and being a hard-hearted naturalist like me, who says no, life does not consist of these individuals. It consists of a flow of materials and energy going through, and so it's the turnover, the continual cycling. At the moment, we've got it wrong in the sense that we can predict the future and see that the population is going to be our undoing, but we won't do anything because the intellect is lagging behind the DNA and the genetic drive to increase.
So on the population front, we're going to be forced into position. Let's cover that later on. Let's just stay on hunting, because quite a lot has happened very rapidly in a very few years compared to relatively slow movement in this argument over quite a lot of hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
We have seen, just saying, our ability to present our caring to a very wide audience. You have talked about the idea of people as a circle, and I feel the centre of the circle, or what I call it perhaps the liberal establishment part of the circle, seems to have split from the rest of the circle and is going off on a vegetarian, vegan. It's moving away from where I feel I am.
Yes, I can understand that. It's to do with the game management is really what it comes down to.
You mean game like animals?
No, the gamekeeper who looks after his pheasants and has a big population, and at the end of the shooting season he's got a small population, which he can keep through the winter or through the breeding season, and then supplement it. He is managing the population, not the individuals. Whereas we as human beings, in regard to each other, we are concerned with the individuals, not with the population as a whole. And that to me is the great discontinuity, the great fault line.
So why is this liberal establishment splitting off and not behaving as humans have?
I don't agree that they're splitting off. They are representing the mass of people, and the mass of people who do not understand the dynamic nature of life and the consequences of managing it for other generations. I mean, there's an excellent book here which is really superb, but you've got to have a very high level of chemistry to understand it, but more than mine.
What is Life by Addie? So
yes.
Tell me about that book.
Well, it gets down to the chemistry, because the subtitle is How Chemistry Becomes Biology. Which is just two ways of looking at it. Anyhow, that's by the by. It's something I'm particularly interested in at the moment.
Is there a way? Is there any way that the vegetarians, the vegans, will see the error of their ways? The philosophical underscoring of what they're doing doesn't, to my mind, work.
Well, it does work at the moment because they are getting individual benefits from it. In increased mating opportunities, if you like, or social position or whatever. But what will happen almost certainly is that Darwinian evolution will supersede everything, and that will come back and reduce our population.
All right, but I think before that happens, I'm thinking about an evolution of ideas. You see, to me, the problem with vegetarianism is it's a hypocritical position to take, and I know that perhaps there's no evidence of hypocrites falling by the wayside, whereas people who are not hypocrites surviving. But if there's any justice, there would be.
Well, yes.
Perhaps there's no justice, but it seems to me that by failing to acknowledge the number of pigeons that are shot in order to deliver their nut roast on Sunday, they are making a terrible mistake.
Well, yes, they're certainly not following a logical argument. But again, the display of, look at me caring I don't eat animals, it's this curious concept, biophilia, and books have been written about it, notably by E.O. Wilson, the great American biologist and naturalist. And that is this genetic connection between all living things. You see a mouse struggling in a swimming pool, even my, and maybe even your intention is to rescue it, because you've got a living thing struggling against inanimate forces. And yet both of us would set a trap in a larder without any compunction at all. So it's this biophilia is the love between all living things and care for, and I think vegetarianism is an extension of that.
Okay, so it's just in the same way a gamekeeper would bring up an orphaned badger while being contracted to shoot its parents. A vegetarian is happy to eat a nut roast. We have these.
Maybe, yes.
We have these problems. Yeah.
If I can just describe very briefly an experiment I used to carry out with my classes when I taught biology in schools, and that is I'd put up a list of animals on a blackboard: a child, a dog, a frog, a lizard, a fly, a butterfly, and one others, and I'd say, write these down in two lists. One list of species you would stop for if you hit it with a bicycle or car, and the other which you would not stop for. But almost exactly the statistics followed the quantity of DNA which we share the proportion.
Oh, so when we think of treating animals, and some people call it a pantheistic manner, so
Yeah.
we consider elephants and whales to be grand and fabulous, and rats to be less important. It is because we share more DNA with
Well,
elephants and
actually,
whales?
no, because both whales, elephants, and rats have become icons, and therefore out of the distorted. But if you take strange animals, obviously the whole class would stop for a child or a dog. One or two boys would not stop for a cat. Several boys, but
I'm with them on that.
all the girls would stop for all the vertebrates. And then you get the sharp cut-off. They wouldn't stop for a fly or a beetle or a worm or something. So this is a measure of it. And sadly, I never kept records of the results over several years.
So can you, just taking that idea a little bit further, one of the least logical things about people who go shooting and hunting is the idea of sportsmanship. It's also one of the most difficult things to explain to a modern BBC presenter. Is there a way of, is it purely, when I display sportsmanship, when I leave a low bird,
Yeah.
or when I give a fox law, or is it my way of saying to the females around me, look at me, aren't I wonderful?
Exactly.
Oh,
It's women.
damn,
Exactly. It's women. It's women. Women are not so impressed by butchers as by huntsmen. And as I've said somewhere, it seems to me that riding to hounds and adultery are closely linked to...
and form the basis of Jilly Cooper's entire career.
Yes, exactly. No, it's women like a little excitement, bullfighting and that sort of thing. They wouldn't admit it. This is a generalization which is going to get me into a lot of trouble. But let's say some women occasionally show admiration for men who take risks when hunting.
Because these men are more likely to put a dead mammoth on their table.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, big table.
It still doesn't solve the problem of what is happening to our hunting, shooting community today. And is there a solution? Is it simply a question of arguing the vegetarians out?
Yes, I think it is. I think we, the hunting fraternity, lack a cohesive intellectual with a very small I a basis for or rationality for what we do and why we do it. Whereas the far commoner opposition is driven by feelings. You've got the three baskets. You can put all questions into. All questions can be answered by feelings, rules, or thoughts. They seldom overlap. They can be muddled, but they are actually distinct drives. And the vast majority of people don't think in this way, are not prepared to learn the hard chemistry to understand the origin of life and so on. And I make no bones about this. I'll just digress slightly. We live in a scientific age, and I think no one can call themselves either educated or cultured if they do not understand the principles behind the first two lines of the periodic table of elements.
I shall go away and learn them.
But not a question of learning the thing, but just understanding what atoms and electrons are made of and so on. And this gives you a firm basis upon which you can build everything else. I was going to say that is the big deficiency in the hunting fraternity's armoury.
What, they don't know the basis for the first two lines of the
No,
periodic table?
they don't have a rational explanation for hunting, which I'm talking about now.
Do they need all three? Do they need a feeling, an emotional explanation and a rational explanation?
Yes, yes, and they exist.
Okay, right. So, but we need to learn that. Can you explain those three versions of why hunting works and not hunting doesn't?
Yes, the huntsmen recognise the transience of life, the fact that life is continuous change. You change your whole body every few months, if not or months, if not weeks. You change your skin in a few days and so on. So you are continually renewing, and the trouble is aging is a process of failed photocopying, if you like. The genetic instructions copy each other, and they make mistakes, and so you get older. But the huntsmen recognise that and shoot the old ones. You see, when I come back and rule the world, anybody over 70, I'm 80, hands in these cards. And so, but in fact, there are behavioural qualifications to that.
So that's the rational reason for hunting. Now give me the emotional reason for hunting.
It's damn good fun. It really is. You get a buzz. When you go do a good shot or a skillful whatever, then you get a little release of dopamine at the end of your nerves. Which my shaky hands show that I've been deficient in. I must take up more hunting, I think. Anyhow.
And your third basket, just remind me what the third basket was?
Rules.
Rules. So give me a rule-based reason for hunting.
Pest control.
And wildlife management and conservation.
Wildlife management.
And we like to see animals around us?
Yes. I don't know whether those are enshrined in law, but certainly there are rules about shooting. You don't shoot low birds and so on, or pot a sitting duck.
Well, yes, some people do. It depends how hungry you are.
Yes, indeed. That's hunting for the pot rather than pleasure. Yeah.
What was your? I mean, you've enjoyed various hunting sports over your life. Which was your favourite?
I suppose beagling, but I was young and foolish and fit then.
What was the? Why was beagling your favourite?
Because you didn't have a horse to manage, which got between you and hunting. You could get right up to the hounds and watch what they were doing. And having walked them all year, all summer, I knew them individually. And to see how they feathered out on the line in the dusk and so on, and to enjoy an extremely difficult thing to do. And it's no good people going out to experience hunting. You've got to do it for a year, every day, all through the summer, with the puppies, and walk them and get to know them. Then you'll see how very difficult it is. And if you want a first-class written account, then James Williams' book, The Otter, has got a chapter on hunting, and he makes this point. You must know the animals, know the hounds individually, recognise their voices, and then you can appreciate what hunting is and how difficult it is to do and how beautiful it is. All right, you may kill an animal from time to time, but again, this doesn't affect life, which is this progress and transition and advance all the time.
You were, I remember going otter hunting just,
yeah.
I think I must have been 4 years old or something. I think we were in the Lake District, weren't we?
Oh, yes, yes.
I mean, you were an otter hunter before the ban came in. James, your great friend,
yes.
late James Williams, was a very keen otter hunter.
Yes.
There came a point with otters, and it goes back to the DDT point you made earlier, that there simply weren't enough of them.
Yes, it is the point, not actually the DDT, but the various other chemicals we were adding to it, and also a long, complicated story, which I shan't go into now. But yes, we hunted otters, and James was master of the, what's it called? I think it's not the Loon Valley, I can't remember the name, Kendall and District Otter Hounds. And they killed about a dozen otters a year. It had no effect on the population at all. And when the otters declined, the otter hunting packs gave up hunting. It was not banned. It was banned long after they had given up.
By the 1981 Wildlife and Countryside Act.
Yes.
Well, while we're on that, can you solve using your methods and show your workings? Could you solve a couple of problems that have been troubling the shooting and hunting communities, especially in the UK recently? First one, big bag days of pheasants, particularly. Yeah. It doesn't bother the antis. They don't care if 2,000 birds are shot. They only care if one bird is shot. But shooters really worry about it.
Yeah.
Is there a basis for shooting large quantities of birds?
Yes, and it's trivial. It's again display. How many shots did you fire? How many birds did you get? The pile of birds around retrieved by the dog. The Spanish have it very well. They send their retrievers out and they pick up anybody's bird. And so it's a race between Salukis, really, to see how many you can gather. But, again, not all Spanish. It has happened in Spain, let's be clear about that.
So if we replace Labradors with lurchers, for example,
yes,
we'll do a lot better.
No, it would be noticed and would be in very bad form.
Right.
It's lad vouchers. It's displaying, because display has two components. One is males to males. I'm above you in the peck order. And however hard you try to disguise this, women are very good at picking up the difference between the two. And the other is males to females. I'm a great hunter. We shot 1,000 birds that day. But that is, if you explain that rationale behind the reason, which is the reason for big bag days, I think a hint of ridicule will creep in, and that would be a good antithesis.
So we're in the emotional bucket, really, aren't we?
Yes. It's controlled by emotions.
Okay, and so we'll commission some cartoonists to make fun of shooters who shoot big bags if we want to end the practice.
It would certainly undermine it a bit. Ridicule and laughter are the great weapons, and cure.
So the next question, which leads on from that, is the question of wild birds, which concentrates the mind a little bit more. Now, last year, the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust asked us to exercise restraint when shooting woodcock because the woodcock breeding season in Russia had been poor the previous year. And they were right in the sense there were fewer woodcock around, but I didn't meet a West Country woodcock keeper, so to speak, who followed the advice. I mean, we saw 10 birds as usual, we'd shoot one of them, 9 birds would fly on, and their rationale was, well, that's fine then.
Yes, I think if you look at if you take the total woodcock population of Eurasia and you subtract the numbers that are actually shot, it is a vanishingly small proportion. I can't back this up with references or anything, but my feeling and perception is this, and therefore it is negligible in terms of impact on the species. There is a case where, I can't remember the details, where rare species should certainly be. I mean, again, James Williams, who was captain of the Triscombe shoot for 11 years, I think it was, and it made it one of the great shoots in the country. And he simply announced one day, right, no woodcock today on this drive because one of them isn't. It's a great snipe from Siberia, a refugee, all right? And they saw it, ticked it in their books, and doffed their hats and let it fly on. So that is a case in point, yes, where it is right.
The third one I want to bring up is Malta, which has been one of our special projects at Fieldsports Channel. They are allowed to shoot 5,000 turtle doves. The argument the European Commissioners, European Union give against that is that these birds are on their way to breed, and therefore that is a bad time to shoot them.
Well, it's a good time to keep the population down, but perhaps that's not the answer you're looking for.
No,
I think
which is perfectly relevant. I will give you a couple more numbers. They're allowed to shoot up to 5,000. The rest of Europe shoots an estimated 2 million turtle doves every year, and nobody knows how many are shot in North Africa.
Yeah.
So should the Maltese stop shooting?
Well, they will be told to stop, whether they do or not.
Well, that's down to the behaviour of the Maltese.
Yes, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think that maybe the shooting there is having an effect on the population.
Is it really 5,000 out of millions?
Well, I don't think there are millions now, but I think the reason for them becoming extinct is becoming rare is the collared dove. And when we lived in Spain, I did a little experiment. We used to get turtle doves and collared doves. I haven't heard a turtle dove in England for several decades. But I did an experiment. When a collared dove came in, it makes I'll try and do it. I can't do it, no. But it's to-do-do.
It's the Greek for 21, isn't it? Decapto or whatever it is.
Decapto, 17.
17, yeah.
There's a good story about that. But anyhow, I make the collared dove call, and it would look at me and then say, gosh, if you're a collared dove, I'm going. And so it'd fly off. Now turtle doves did the same. When I had a turtle dove, I'd make the collared dove call and they too would go. And the collared dove is a much more aggressive and robust bird than the turtle dove, and has pushed them out. And ecologically and feeding-wise, they occupy much the same sort of niche. You see, I remember hearing people say, have you heard there's collared doves been seen in Turkey? 20, 30 years later, I was in Morocco and heard the first ones arriving, or they hadn't been reported regularly. And now they're spread over the whole of Europe. They're very successful.
This is collared doves.
Collared doves, yes. No,
Yes,
turtle doves have been here forever, but they've been pushed out by this other species.
So it actually doesn't matter how many we shoot. It's a collared
No,
dove.
if you shot as many collared doves as possible, then you'd probably find that, and didn't shoot turtle doves, then you'd probably find that the turtle doves spread back in again.
You just made the point that in order to improve the lot of the turtle dove, we should be shooting the collared dove. Is there a similar point that could save human beings? Because your book, The Human Population Tsunami, suggests we're heading for a bit of a cliff.
We are.
We have done quite well so far.
Yes.
And one could argue the Matt Ridley version of this, which is because we've done quite well so far, we'll continue to do quite well.
That is a deeply flawed argument.
He's a very keen shooter.
I'm sorry, yes, well, good luck to him, and I won't say start on people. No, I addressed this matter in a lecture to the Linnean Society in 2009, and people at the end of it asked me, what are your proposals? And I said, I declined to give them. I'm not going to make any proposal now, but just look at the facts. If you can show that the proposition a finite, you cannot go on increasing the removal of resources from a closed system without there being trouble.
Well, we have, because we invented nitrate fertilizer, for example, and extended our life beyond.
In that small effect, but
it's quite a big effect. I mean, we went from the Maltesian disaster to Maltesian +1, really, didn't we?
Yes.
And we could do that again.
Well, Malthus actually overlooked, when he forecast the crash, he overlooked the emigration of people to the New World, the space for that. But the other prediction of who wrote "Small is Beautiful"? No,
can't remember. Sorry.
The other prediction that the world will run out of food neglected to take into account the green revolution of genetic engineering by selection, of just improvement of crops, petrol-based pesticides and fertilizers.
Well, we may. I mean, I see the point that we are expanding to fit at the moment, and there is a point at which we won't be able to fit easily. But would it be a problem of a tipping point, which?
Yes, and we've long since passed it.
But that's your idea, or will there be a gradual and managed version of society that allows us to fit and relies on technology to increase our life as a species?
Not at the present rate of increase. It's just simply impossible. You can't. The old argument you cannot. The old argument that when everybody has a good standard of living, you can't. Then population will slow down. It doesn't work. You've got to have. I put all the figures in this here. I can't remember them offhand. So you've got to have new teachers for 3,000 schools every 5 weeks. The world is a big place, but not that big. You've got to have 100,000 national health workers, police force, engineers, builders. You've got to build a city the size of London every 5 weeks on a new and pristine bit of country. It can't be done. That's just to keep the same standard of living, not taking into account the 1.5 billion people who live in poverty. It's not a soluble problem by the traditional methods. It's going to end in bloodshed. And the simple question is whether it ends in peaceful dying of old age in one's own bed, or messily while governments go rogue or collapse, and what they call warlords battle for diminishing resources. It's going to be a mess. That's my view. But if I can just continue a little bit, you went to Kenya first in 2006, was it? And again in 2012?
1993, 2012, yeah.
1993. But in that time, the first time you went, I'm right in thinking, you saw people living in enclaves in a countryside occupied by wildlife.
Well, the Central Rift was absolutely not pristine, but it was pretty empty. There were distinct towns like Naivasha and Nakuru.
Yeah.
If you looked down from Gilgil onto the Central Rift in 2012, the Shambaization of everything that wasn't basically defended by rifles was complete.
Yes, so in effect, the country was occupied by people with enclaves of wildlife. That's the point I'm making.
Okay.
And the world is getting like that.
The world is getting like that.
Yeah.
So I suppose when one talks about the managed environment, it becomes all the more important to, or does it become more important to resolve the argument over managed environment?
It's yes, as I said in my lecture to the Linnean Society, it is not wildlife that needs management, but people that do. And if you can manage the people, and don't forget, people are a living process of continuous recycling and replication and rejuvenation. It's a subject I'd rather not discuss because it is so contentious. But all I can say is that if the principles of game management are applied to people, the problem would end.
Well, let's end on a high note. One good thing is, one of the things you're known for on Fieldsports Channel is these little sports. Butterfly hunting, ferreting mice with bumblebees, prawning. Now, those sports are going to become very important. We're not going to have the room to do fox hunting, are we?
No, I suppose not. But yes, you want me to try and think up something else?
Yes, please.
I will try. No promises. One is up against the public opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And if anybody wants a good article on that, read J.S. Mill on liberty. Published in 1849, the same year as Origin of Species.